Chapter 1. Tessa Lane adjusted the angle of her ring light, frowning at the faint shadow the device cast on her ceramic mug. The camera perched on her tripod blinked red, indicating it was recording, but she paused before speaking, tugging at the sleeves of her oversized lavender sweater. "Okay, let's try this again," she muttered under her breath. Taking a steadying breath, she pasted on a cheerful smile and leaned forward. "Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're talking about self-care on a budget, because let's be honest, we could all use a little extra TLC without breaking the bank." Her voice carried an upbeat lilt, but the forced cheeriness grated on her nerves. She demonstrated the steps of her DIY coffee scrub, her hands moving methodically as she described the ingredients. And there you have it, folks, a spa day in your own kitchen. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you want more cozy self-care tips from yours truly. Tessa hit the stop button with a resigned sigh. The moment the recording ended, her smile dropped, and she slumped into her chair. "You're a fraud," she whispered, glaring at the camera. Her phone buzzed against the desk, a stark reminder of reality. She flipped it over and winced at the text. "Mom, are you still wasting time on that video nonsense? You could have been promoted by now if you'd focused on your real job." Her stomach churned, but she shoved the phone aside. Ignore it. She glanced at the clock. 4:47 p.m. Just enough time to grab a coffee before her shift at the diner. She didn't need another lecture from Sandra, her manager, about punctuality. The diner was packed when she arrived, the warm scent of frying bacon clashing with the sting of burnt coffee. Tessa tied on her apron, her fingers fumbling with the knot as Sandra stormed out of the kitchen. "You're late again," Sandra barked, arms crossed over her chest. Her frown deepened, the lines etched into her face. "Only by 2 minutes," Tessa protested weakly. Sandra's gaze hardened. 2 minutes turns into 10, then 20. You think customers care about your excuses? Start pulling your weight, or find somewhere else to waste time. Tessa bit back a retort, her face burning. She grabbed a tray and wove through the tables, plastering on her practiced customer service smile. "Refill for you, sir," she asked a man in a rumpled suit, his eyes glued to his phone. He grunted without looking up. By the end of her shift, her feet ached, her sweater clung to her from spilled coffee, and the tip jar offered little consolation. The alley shortcut to her apartment was a risk she usually avoided, but exhaustion made her reckless. As she turned the corner, the faint buzz of city life dulled, replaced by the crunch of gravel beneath her boots. "Hey, sweetheart," a voice slithered out of the shadows, freezing her in place. A man stepped into view, his face obscured by a hood. Her heart pounded as she instinctively clutched her bag. "I don't have anything," she stammered, inching backward. "Just hand it over," he growled, reaching for her. Before she could scream, a blur of movement exploded from the darkness. The mugger was yanked backward with a feral snarl, his shout cut short. Tessa's vision sharpened on her rescuer. Broad shoulders wrapped in a leather jacket, tousled dark hair, and eyes that glowed like molten amber. His stance radiated predatory grace, his lips curled back to reveal startlingly sharp teeth. "You all right?" His voice was rough, a gravelly timbre that sent a shiver down her spine. Yes, I think so," she stuttered, clutching her bag to her chest. The man glanced at her, then the alleyway, as if assessing hidden threats. His gaze lingered on her for a moment longer, and she felt as if he could see straight through her. "Be careful next time," he said, his tone curt but not unkind. Without another word, he disappeared into the shadows, leaving her heart racing. Back at her apartment, Tessa sank onto her couch, replaying the incident in her head. Her hands trembled as she turned on her camera, the one place she felt she could safely process her thoughts. "So, I had the weirdest thing happen tonight," she began, her voice still shaky. I was mugged. Don't worry, I'm okay. But this man came out of nowhere and saved me." She paused, staring at the camera's lens. "He was, I don't know, intense, like something out of a movie, and his eyes, they practically glowed." She laughed nervously. "Maybe I imagined it. Anyway," Here's your reminder not to walk through creepy alleys. Tessa clicked the video off, exhaling deeply. The adrenaline was wearing off, but her curiosity burned hotter. Who was he? She glanced at her bag, still clutched tightly against her chest. Thanks, mysterious stranger, she murmured, a nervous smile tugging at her lips. Little did she know, the stranger wasn't the only one keeping secrets. Chapter 2. Tessa's phone buzzed incessantly on the kitchen counter, the notifications pouring in like a torrential downpour. She shuffled to the counter, nursing her second coffee of the morning, and unlocked the screen with a swipe. Her video from last night had exploded. She scrolled through the comments, her groggy brain struggling to process the influx of engagement. Gee, that's insane. Who was he? Glowing eyes? Sounds like some Twilight-level stuff. Are we sure this eye wasn't, like, superhuman or something? No normal dude moves that fast. Tessa frowned, rereading that last comment. She took a sip of coffee and muttered, It was dark. Maybe I just imagined it. Still, she couldn't deny the way his eyes had burned into hers, or how quickly he'd taken down the mugger. And it wasn't exactly normal. A knock at her apartment door startled her, and she nearly spilled her drink. Setting the mug down, she cracked open the door to find her best friend, Lila, waving a donut bag like a peace offering. I come bearing sugar, Lila announced. You're forgiven for dropping by unannounced, Tessa teased, opening the door wider. Lila plopped onto the couch, kicking off her sneakers. All right, spill. What's this about a hot alley hero? And why does he sound like Batman? Tessa groaned, grabbing her phone. I didn't mean for it to blow up like this. I was just venting. Lila snatched the phone from her hand, scrolling through the comments with an amused smirk. People are eating this up. Wait, glowing eyes? Are you sure you weren't just dazzled by his good looks? I know what I saw, Tessa said defensively, flopping into the armchair. But I don't know. Maybe the adrenaline messed with my head. Lila wiggled her eyebrows. Or maybe he's secretly a superhero. Glowing eyes, crazy reflexes? Come on, Tessa, this is prime content. I'm not turning this into a series, Tessa said firmly, though the idea of finding out more about him lingered in her mind. Miles away, Logan Kane leaned against the porch railing of his secluded cabin, his amber eyes fixed on the tree line. The thick forest surrounded his home like a fortress, but Logan's instincts prickled with unease. Tell me you're not brooding again, Danny drawled, stepping outside with a steaming mug. His sandy blonde hair was still messy from sleep, and he leaned against the doorframe with a smirk. Logan grunted in response. Danny took a sip of his coffee, watching his older brother with a knowing expression. You're thinking about the girl, aren't you? The one from last night? She filmed it, Logan said flatly. Or talked about it at least. The video's spreading. Danny winced. You're sure? Logan turned to face him, his expression grim. It's only a matter of time before someone connects the dots. Great. Another PR nightmare, Danny said, his tone laced with sarcasm. Should we send her a fruit basket with a note that says, "Thanks for almost exposing us"? Logan's glare was answer enough. Relax, big bro. Most people won't believe her. Humans love a good story, but glowing eyes, super strength, that's tabloid junk. Not to the hunters, Logan snapped. His voice was low but carried a sharp edge. They'll take any excuse to come after us. Danny sobered, his smirk fading. All right, so, what's the plan? You can't exactly go knocking on her door and demand she take it down. Logan's jaw tightened. I'll figure it out. Just stay alert. Danny shrugged, heading back inside. Sure thing, Alpha. Just remember, you can't save everyone. Tessa refreshed her notifications for the third time that afternoon, her anxiety growing with every comment. Then a private message caught her eye. Be careful who you talk about. Not everyone is who they seem. Her stomach flipped. The username was a jumble of letters and numbers, and their profile picture was blank. She stared at the message, her mind racing. Another message pinged moments later. You don't know what you're messing with. Leave it alone. Tessa locked her phone, her hands trembling. What the hell? Lila, who had been scrolling through her own feed, glanced up. You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. It's nothing, Tessa lied, forcing a smile. Probably just some troll. But as she sat back, the unease refused to leave. She could still see those glowing eyes, feel the weight of that stranger's gaze. Something wasn't adding up, and it wasn't just the trolls. Unbeknownst to her, outside the apartment, Logan's instincts flared again. He paused in the forest's shadows, watching her window from a distance. A faint breeze carried a foreign scent. One that didn't belong. Hunters. His fists clenched. He'd been right to worry. Tessa's phone buzzed again, this time with another anonymous message. You're being watched. Chapter 3. Tessa perched on the edge of her couch, her phone balanced on a stack of precariously placed books as she adjusted her laptop screen. The soft hum of the camera lens focusing filled the small room. A calming candle flickered in the background, adding a cozy glow that clashed with her frazzled nerves. Hey everyone, she began, her voice overly bright as she waved at the camera. Today, I'm keeping it simple. 5 easy breakfasts for people on the go, no alley shortcuts required. She forced a chuckle, but winced at her own awkwardness. The live chat immediately filled with comments. We're not here for oatmeal, Tessa. What about the glowing-eyed guy? Any updates on Alley Batman? Forget breakfast, we want the mystery man. Tessa sighed, scrolling past the barrage of messages. Thanks for the enthusiasm, she muttered under her breath before plastering on another smile. Let's focus on breakfast, shall we? But her audience wouldn't let it go. Even as she demonstrated how to make overnight oats, the chat exploded with theories, from government experiments to secret superheroes. After ending the live stream, Tessa sank back into the couch, running her hands through her hair. Why did I ever bring it up? The sound of a sudden, sharp knock at her door made her jump. Her pulse quickened. It was late, and she wasn't expecting anyone. Peeking through the peephole, she saw him, the man from the alley, Logan. Her stomach did a nervous flip as she hesitated, her fingers resting on the chain lock. What are you doing here? She called through the door. Open the door, Tessa, Logan said, his voice low and commanding. She hesitated a moment longer before undoing the lock and cracking the door open. How do you know my name? He pushed the door wider and stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his intense gaze locking onto hers. The small apartment suddenly felt even smaller with him in it, his broad shoulders nearly brushing the doorframe. What are you doing? She asked, her voice a mix of defiance and nerves. You need to take the video down, he said bluntly, his amber eyes practically glowing in the dim light. Tessa folded her arms, trying to hide the trembling in her hands. Excuse me? You don't get to just barge in here and... You don't understand the danger you're in, Logan interrupted, his tone sharp but not unkind. That video is drawing attention. Dangerous attention. She stared at him, her heart pounding. What kind of attention? Who are you? Logan clenched his jaw, clearly debating how much to say. The kind you don't want following you. People who won't ask questions before they act. Tessa's mind raced. His words were cryptic, but the intensity in his gaze told her he wasn't exaggerating. You mean the trolls? It's just the internet. People say stuff all the time. Not trolls, Logan said, his voice dropping into a near growl. Hunters. The words sent a chill down her spine, though she wasn't entirely sure why. Hunters, she echoed. Logan ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. Look, just take it down. Forget this ever happened. Forget this happened? She repeated, incredulous. You saved me from getting mugged, and now you're showing up at my apartment, talking about hunters? You're going to have to give me more than that. His eyes softened for a moment, the frustration replaced by something almost like regret. I can't, he said quietly. Just trust me, Tessa. It's safer if you don't know. Before she could respond, he turned and left, shutting the door behind him with a quiet but definitive click. Logan strode through the woods surrounding her apartment, his senses on high alert. The faintest hint of a foreign scent, metallic, sharp, lingered in the air. It was the smell of steel and gunpowder, unmistakable markers of hunters. He cursed under his breath, his wolf instincts surging. He'd been right to warn her, but it might already be too late. As he reached the edge of the woods, Danny emerged from the shadows, his expression serious. "They're close, aren't they?" "Too close," Logan replied. "They've caught wind of her video. If they figure out she's connected to me..." Danny smirked, though his eyes lacked humor. "Maybe you should have left out the glowing eyes in your hero moment." Logan shot him a glare. "Not the time, Danny." Danny held up his hands. All right. So, what's the plan?" "She's stubborn. I doubt she'll take it down just because you told her to." "She'll take it down," Logan said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Back in her apartment, Tessa sat cross-legged on her bed, her laptop open as she scoured the internet. She typed "wolf attack" into the search bar, her curiosity burning despite Logan's warning. One article caught her eye. "Mysterious wolf sightings in Black Hollow. Residents report unusual activity." Her heart thudded as she clicked the link. The story detailed a string of strange incidents. Shredded fences, paw prints too large for any known species, and livestock disappearing without a trace. Black Hollow. It wasn't far from the city. She leaned back, chewing on her thumbnail. Logan's warning echoed in her mind, but her instincts told her there was more to the story. Her phone buzzed again, another anonymous message lighting up the screen. "Stay out of it, Tessa. You've been warned." Despite the fear prickling her skin, a spark of determination flared. Whoever Logan was, and whatever he was hiding, she was going to find out. Chapter 4. Tessa tapped her GPS screen, squinting at the map. The winding back road she'd followed seemed more suited for ghost stories than investigative outings. Towering trees loomed overhead, their skeletal branches interlocking like fingers. "You've officially lost it, Tessa," she muttered to herself, gripping the steering wheel tighter. The article about the wolf attacks had been vague, but curiosity gnawed at her like an itch she couldn't scratch. Something about Logan, his cryptic warnings, his glowing eyes, had sparked questions she couldn't leave unanswered. The dirt road ended in a small clearing. She parked her car and stepped out, the cool air biting at her cheeks. A faint trail led into the woods, and she hesitated for only a moment before following it. Her phone was clutched tightly in one hand, the flashlight barely cutting through the dense darkness. The only sounds were the crunch of her boots on leaves and the occasional rustle of unseen animals. "This is fine," she whispered, as if convincing herself. "Totally normal behavior. Just a woman, alone in the woods at night. Great life choices." The trail opened into a larger clearing, and her breath caught. In the moonlight, she saw them. Massive paw prints embedded in the dirt, far too large for any regular wolf. She crouched down, snapping a photo with her phone. A low growl rumbled behind her, freezing her in place. Slowly, she turned. Her heart nearly stopped. A massive wolf stood at the edge of the clearing, its fur an inky black that seemed to absorb the moonlight. Its eyes, glowing an unnatural amber, locked onto her, and a primal terror surged through her chest. "Easy," she whispered, her voice trembling. She held up her hands, the phone forgotten. The wolf growled again, but something in its gaze wasn't entirely wild. Before she could process what she was seeing, the wolf's body shimmered, its outline distorting like heat waves rising from pavement. Tessa's eyes widened as fur receded, bones shifted, and the hulking beast began to morph into something human. "Logan!" she gasped, stumbling backward, her foot catching on a root. She hit the ground hard, her phone slipping from her grasp and landing a few feet away. The flashlight illuminated Logan's partially shifted form, half man, half wolf, and she scrambled to her knees, fumbling for her phone. The sound of a snarl cut through the air, but it wasn't Logan. Another creature, smaller but no less terrifying, emerged from the shadows. It charged at her with frightening speed. "Tessa, move!" Logan's voice, still tinged with a growl, snapped her out of her stupor. She barely had time to roll out of the way before Logan leapt, fully shifting mid-air into his wolf form. Tessa scrambled to her feet, grabbing her phone. The beam of light swung wildly as she tried to capture what was happening, but her shaking hands made the footage blurry and chaotic. The fight ended as quickly as it began. Logan stood over the other wolf's motionless body, his chest heaving. His eyes found hers, and the fury in them made her freeze. "What are you doing here?" he growled, his voice rough as he shifted back to his human form. He stalked toward her, his movements sharp and predatory. I was just following breadcrumbs," he snapped, his amber eyes blazing. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" She shrank under his glare, but her frustration flared. "I don't know what's going on because you won't tell me anything." Logan exhaled sharply, pinching the bridge of his nose. "You shouldn't have come here, Tessa. It's dangerous." "I can see that," she shot back, gesturing to the lifeless wolf. "What was that? What are you?" He stared at her for a long moment, his jaw clenched. Finally he spoke, his voice low and deliberate. "I'm someone who's trying to keep you alive." Her breath hitched. The weight of his words settled over her like a heavy blanket, and for the first time she truly felt the gravity of the situation. Logan's gaze softened slightly, though his frustration was still evident. "That thing back there wasn't the only one hunting tonight. You're on their radar now." Tessa's mouth went dry. "You mean the hunters?" Logan nodded grimly. "And after tonight, they know you're connected to me." Her knees felt weak, and she sank onto a fallen log. "This is insane," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "I warned you," Logan said, his voice gentler now but no less firm. "You've put yourself, and me, in danger." She looked up at him, her fear warring with the strange pull she felt toward him. "Then tell me how to fix it." Logan hesitated, his expression conflicted. "There's no easy fix, Tessa. The best thing you can do is stay out of it." Her jaw tightened. "I'm not good at staying out of things." For a moment, the corners of his mouth twitched, as if he might smile, but the seriousness returned just as quickly. "Then you'd better be ready for what comes next." Logan stepped closer, his amber eyes locking onto hers, "because now they're coming for both of us." Chapter 5. Tessa stared blankly at her laptop screen, the cursor blinking at the edge of an unfinished script for her next vlog. She had written the opening line, "Hey everyone, let's talk about," but the rest of the sentence evaded her. The coffee shop she had chosen as her workspace buzzed with life. Cups clinked, milk steamed, and chatter filled the air, but Tessa felt utterly disconnected from it all. Her mind was stuck on two things: the glowing-eyed man who had charged into her life like a storm, and the shadowy dangers that now loomed because of him. "Excuse me, Tessa Lane?" The voice pulled her from her daze, and she looked up to find a girl, barely out of her teens, clutching her phone with wide eyes. Yeah?" Tessa said hesitantly. "Oh my gosh, I love your channel. You're like so real. And that video about the alley guy? I've watched it like 1,000,000 times." "Yeah?" Heat crept up Tessa's neck. "Thanks," she muttered, forcing a polite smile. "Do you know anything else about him? Like who he is?" the girl asked eagerly. "Nope, just what I said in the video," Tessa lied. The girl's face fell, but she quickly brightened. "Well, if you ever do a follow-up, I'll totally watch. You're so inspiring." Tessa offered a weak "thanks" before the girl wandered off. She groaned, slumping over her laptop. "Inspiring," she muttered. "Sure." Her phone vibrated on the table, another barrage of notifications lighting up the screen. Most were harmless. Comments from fans, theories about Alley Batman, and one particularly inventive post suggesting he was a time-traveling vigilante. But a handful of messages made her stomach churn. "You're meddling in things you don't understand. Stop. Take the video down, or else." "You're in over your head, sweetheart." Tessa locked her phone and shoved it into her bag, the weight of those words settling in her chest. At the pack's hidden compound, deep in the woods, Logan paced the length of the main cabin's meeting room. His movements were sharp, restless, his wolf on edge. "You've got to fix this, Logan," Danny said, leaning casually against the wall but watching his brother with a seriousness that didn't match his posture. "I'm working on it," Logan snapped. Danny raised an eyebrow. "Yeah? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're just waiting for the hunters to show up at our doorstep." "Enough," Logan growled. The room fell silent, but the tension was palpable. Other pack members sat around the large table, their expressions ranging from worried to outright hostile. "She's a problem, Logan," a wiry man named Kyle said, his tone cutting. "You've brought danger to our pack because of her." "She didn't ask for this," Logan shot back. "But she's here, isn't she?" Lydia, the pack's healer, spoke gently but firmly. "You've always been careful, Logan. Why take this risk now?" Logan raked a hand through his hair, frustration simmering beneath his calm exterior. "Because she didn't deserve to be left out there to fend for herself. And now that she's involved, it's my responsibility to keep her safe." Kyle snorted. "And what happens when her savior story goes viral again? She's a liability." Logan's eyes glinted dangerously. "She's mine to deal with, not yours." Danny sighed, stepping forward. "All right, enough posturing. The real issue is the hunters. We've dealt with worse, Logan, but you need to figure out if she's worth the trouble before this blows up in our faces." Logan said nothing, his jaw tightening. Tessa shuffled through her apartment later that evening, her unease growing with every passing hour. The cryptic messages, the looks from strangers, the weight of knowing her curiosity had put her in this position. It was suffocating. She set her camera on the counter, fiddling with the settings out of habit more than necessity. She had hoped vlogging would distract her, but even the idea of filming felt hollow now. A knock at the door startled her, and her heart leapt into her throat. "Who is it?" she called, her voice shaky. "It's me, Logan." She opened the door cautiously, finding him standing there with his usual air of barely restrained intensity. His eyes softened slightly when he saw her, but his posture was rigid. "We need to talk," he said. Tessa stepped aside, letting him in. "I thought I wasn't supposed to be involved." Logan exhaled heavily, leaning against the wall. "You already are. I can't undo that." Her frustration bubbled over. "Then explain it to me. The hunters, the wolves, the cryptic warnings. What the hell is going on, Logan?" He met her gaze, and for a moment she saw a flicker of vulnerability beneath the steely exterior. "If I do, there's no going back. You'll be a part of this, whether you want to be or not." "I think we're past that point," she said quietly. Logan studied her, his jaw working as he debated his next move. Finally he nodded. "Fine, but if you're coming into my world, you need to know what you're up against, and what it's going to cost you." Logan's amber eyes burned with an intensity that made Tessa's chest tighten. "Pack your things. You're coming with me." Chapter 6. Tessa stared out the window of Logan's truck as the narrow, winding road gave way to dense forest. The further they drove, the more the trees seemed to close in, blocking out the last traces of civilization. "This feels like the setup for a true crime documentary," she muttered, hugging her bag to her chest. Logan's lips twitched, but the smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "If I wanted to hurt you, I wouldn't have waited this long." "Comforting," she said dryly. The truck slowed as they approached a clearing. Several rustic cabins were scattered among the trees, their weathered wood blending seamlessly with the surroundings. Logan parked near the largest one, cutting the engine and turning to her. "Stay close to me," he said, his tone serious. "They won't like this." "Who's they?" "My pack. As in, wolf." Logan nodded, stepping out of the truck without waiting for her to process the answer. She followed reluctantly, her boots crunching on the gravel as she glanced around. The door of the largest cabin opened, and a wiry man with sharp features stepped out, his expression hard. "Logan." "Kyle?" Logan said curtly. Kyle's eyes flicked to Tessa, narrowing. "This her?" "This is Tessa," Logan replied. "She's with me." "That doesn't answer the question," Kyle shot back, crossing his arms. Tessa opened her mouth to respond, but Logan cut her off. "She's not a threat. We'll talk inside." Kyle snorted but stepped aside, his gaze lingering on Tessa with clear suspicion. Inside, the cabin was cozy but utilitarian, the walls lined with maps and photos of what Tessa assumed were pack members. Danny leaned against the edge of a table, his usual smirk in place. "Well, well," he drawled. "So this is the famous Tessa. Thought you'd be taller." Tessa blinked. "Excuse me?" Lydia, seated near the fireplace, shot Danny a warning glance before standing. Her long braids swayed as she approached, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the tension in the room. "Logan," Lydia said softly, her dark eyes flicking to Tessa. "You've brought her here?" Logan nodded, his jaw tight. "She needs to understand the stakes." "I'm right here," Tessa interjected, folding her arms. "You don't have to talk around me." Lydia's lips curved into a faint smile, but her gaze remained sharp. "Fair enough. What do you know so far?" "Not much," Tessa admitted. "Wolves, hunters, glowing eyes. Oh, and apparently I've ruined Logan's life by existing," Danny chuckled, earning him another glare from Lydia. Logan stepped forward, his expression grave. "It's not just about me. The hunters want us gone. All of us. And they'll use anyone they can to make that happen." Tessa frowned. "Why? What do they have against wolves?" Lydia exchanged a glance with Logan before answering. "Because we're not human. To them, that makes us dangerous." Tessa absorbed this in silence, her mind racing. "And the glowing eyes? The super strength? That's normal for you?" Logan's lips twitched in something that might have been amusement. "Normal for wolves, yes." "And the hunters?" "They're trained to kill us," Logan said bluntly. "They've been tracking us for generations. Every pack has a story about the ones who didn't survive." The gravity of his words settled over Tessa like a heavy blanket. Their conversation was interrupted by a sharp howl that echoed through the forest. Logan's head snapped toward the sound, his body tensing. "What is it?" Tessa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Trouble," Logan said, already heading for the door. Outside, several pack members were gathered near the tree line, their postures tense. "Hunters," Kyle spat, pointing to the faint glow of flashlights moving through the trees. Danny appeared at Logan's side, his easygoing demeanor replaced with sharp focus. "What's the plan?" "Keep them away from the cabins," Logan said. "If they see too much, we're done." "And her?" Kyle jerked his chin toward Tessa. "She stays here," Logan growled. Tessa bristled. "I'm not a child." "You'll be safer inside," Logan interrupted, his amber eyes flashing. Before she could argue further, Logan shifted seamlessly into his wolf form and disappeared into the shadows, followed by several other pack members. Tessa stood frozen in the doorway, her heart pounding as snarls and shouts echoed through the forest. The fight was over quickly. Logan and the others returned, their clothes torn and their faces grim. "They're testing us," Logan said, his voice tight. "It's only a matter of time before they escalate." Tessa's stomach churned. "What does that mean for me?" "It means you're in more danger than ever," Lydia said gently. As if on cue, Tessa's phone buzzed. She hesitated before pulling it out, her blood running cold at the message displayed on the screen. "Help us find Logan, or you'll regret it." Tessa handed Logan her phone, her hands trembling. "They're not going to stop, are they?" "No," Logan said, his voice low and steady. "But neither am I." Chapter 7. Tessa followed Logan up the narrow path toward the pack's main cabin, the morning mist curling around her ankles. The woods were eerily silent, except for the occasional crunch of gravel beneath their boots. "You're quiet today," Logan said without looking back, his tone neutral but laced with curiosity. "Just processing," Tessa replied, shoving her hands into the pockets of her jacket. "You know, werewolves, hunters, life or math stakes, casual stuff." Logan's lips twitched, but he said nothing, leading her to the cabin. When they entered, the room fell silent. Pack members seated around a long wooden table turned to stare at her, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Danny was the first to break the tension. "And here she is," he announced, pushing back his chair with a dramatic flourish. "The infamous Tessa Lane, vlogger extraordinaire. I hope you brought your ring light." Tessa blinked, unsure how to respond, but the sharpness in his grin softened the sting. "Danny," Logan said, his voice carrying an edge of warning. "What? I'm being welcoming," Danny replied, raising his hands in mock surrender. Lydia, seated near the far end of the table, gestured for Tessa to sit. "Ignore him," she said warmly. "You'll find Danny's bark is worse than his bite." "Debatable," Danny muttered, earning a glare from Lydia. Tessa eased into the chair closest to her, acutely aware of the tension in the room. The meeting didn't go smoothly. "Why is she here?" Kyle demanded, leaning forward with his arms crossed. His sharp features seemed even more angular under the cabin's dim light. "She's a liability," another pack member added. "She's also sitting right here," Tessa said, her voice firmer than she felt. "That's enough," Logan growled, silencing the room. He looked at each of them, his amber eyes glowing faintly. "She's here because she's in danger, and because I trust her," Kyle snorted. "That makes one of us." Tessa's frustration flared. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask to be chased by hunters or dragged into your wolf politics. But here we are." The room fell quiet again, tension crackling in the air. Danny smirked. "Well, she's got more backbone than I expected." Lydia's calm voice broke through the unease. "Let's not forget what's important. The hunters are closing in. Division within the pack only makes us weaker." Logan gave her a grateful nod. "We stick together, or we don't survive." Later, as the meeting dispersed, Tessa found herself lingering by the fireplace. The warmth was a welcome contrast to the chilly reception she'd received from most of the pack. Logan approached her, his expression softer than she'd seen all day. "You held your own back there." Tessa glanced at him, her lips curving into a wry smile. "Yeah, well, being stared down by a room full of wolves wasn't on my bucket list." Logan leaned against the mantel, his eyes fixed on the crackling flames. "They're wary of outsiders. It's instinct. Protecting the pack comes first." "And you?" Tessa asked, her tone quieter. "I'm their alpha," Logan said simply. "Every decision I make is for their survival, even if they don't agree with it." She studied him for a moment, noting the tension in his shoulders, the exhaustion in his eyes. "That sounds lonely." Logan didn't respond right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer. "It is." For a moment, the room felt smaller, the space between them charged with unspoken understanding. Meanwhile, miles away, the hunters were hard at work. A darkened room buzzed with activity as screens flickered with images and data. One screen displayed a paused frame from Tessa's viral video, the blurry, glowing eyes of her ally savior. "She's the key," one of the hunters said, his voice cold. "She leads us to him." Another hunter leaned over the table, tracing a finger along a map. "The pack's territory is vast, but if we keep tracking her movements, we'll find him," the first hunter finished, his eyes glinting with determination. Back at the pack's compound, Tessa wandered outside, needing air. The clearing was quiet, the night air crisp and filled with the scent of pine. She barely noticed Lydia approach until the healer spoke. "They're tracking you," Lydia said, her tone calm but grave. Tessa turned, her stomach nodding. "How do you know?" Lydia held up a small device, sleek, black, and blinking faintly. "I found this near the cabin, a tracker, likely planted while you were in town." Tessa's breath caught. "You're saying they're following me?" Lydia nodded. "Which means it's not just you in danger, it's all of us." Tessa clutched the device, her knuckles white. "What do we do now?" Logan's voice, firm and unwavering, cut through the dark. "We fight back." Chapter 8. Tessa stood in the clearing, gripping the handle of a wooden training staff so tightly her knuckles turned white. Around her, members of Logan's pack milled about, some sparring in pairs while others stretched or observed. Kyle sauntered over, a smirk tugging at his lips. "You sure you want to do this, sweetheart? We don't usually train civilians." "I'm not a civilian," Tessa shot back, lifting her chin. "I'm part of this now." He barked a laugh. "Part of this? You can't even hold the stick right." Tessa's cheeks flushed. But before she could retort, Danny appeared, slinging an arm around her shoulders with exaggerated enthusiasm. "Come on, Kyle, don't crush her spirit before she's had a chance to embarrass herself," Danny said, grinning. Tessa rolled her eyes. "Thanks for the vote of confidence," Danny winked. "Anytime, rookie." The session was a disaster. Tessa's first attempt at sparring ended with her tripping over a tree root and landing flat on her back. The second attempt wasn't much better. Kyle disarmed her within seconds, his smug expression making her blood boil. "You've got to anticipate the movement," Lydia called from the sidelines, her tone encouraging but firm. "I'm trying," Tessa huffed, brushing dirt off her jeans. Danny handed her the staff with a sympathetic smile. "Don't take it personally. Kyle's a jerk to everyone. Well, almost everyone." Tessa narrowed her eyes at Kyle, who was now leaning against a tree, clearly enjoying the show. "Again?" she said, gripping the staff. Later, as the group took a break, Logan approached, his expression unreadable. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "Yes, I do," Tessa replied, meeting his gaze. "I'm not just going to sit around while everyone else fights. I need to pull my weight." Logan's jaw tightened. "There's a difference between pulling your weight and getting yourself hurt." "I'm fine," she insisted. As if to prove him wrong, she winced when she shifted her stance, her ankle throbbing from an earlier misstep. Logan's sharp eyes didn't miss it. "You're done for today," he said firmly. "Logan? Tessa." His tone left no room for argument. Frustrated, she turned away, missing the way Logan's protective gaze lingered on her. That evening, Danny found Tessa sitting on the cabin steps, a bag of ice pressed to her ankle. "Rough day?" he asked, plopping down beside her. "Understatement," Tessa muttered. Danny chuckled. "Hey, for what it's worth, you didn't totally embarrass yourself. Just mostly." She glared at him, but the corner of her mouth twitched. Thanks, Danny. Your support means everything." He bumped her shoulder lightly. "Seriously, though, you've got guts, Tessa. Most people would have run screaming after half the stuff you've been through." "I don't feel brave," she admitted. "Brave isn't about not being scared," Danny said, his tone uncharacteristically earnest. "It's about sticking it out even when you are. You'll get there." The next morning, the pack was on high alert. Reports of hunters near the territory had everyone tense, and Logan gathered the group to strategize. Tessa listened intently, though she felt out of place among the seasoned wolves. "Stick close to me," Logan told her as they prepared to patrol the area. "I can handle myself," she said, though her earlier failures weighed heavily on her confidence. Logan gave her a pointed look. "This isn't a game, Tessa." Their patrol led them to a remote part of the territory, where a young wolf, barely more than a teenager, had been left behind after a skirmish. "Hunters are nearby," Logan said, his voice low and urgent. "We need to get him out of here." As they moved, the sound of a gunshot shattered the silence. "Get down," Logan barked, pulling Tessa behind a tree as the hunters closed in. Adrenaline surged through her as she crouched beside him, her heart pounding. Logan shifted seamlessly into his wolf form, leaping into the fray with terrifying precision. Tessa's hands trembled as she grabbed a fallen branch, determined to do something, anything to help. When a hunter broke through the trees, she swung with all her might, catching him off guard. The young wolf yelped as a trap snapped shut around his leg. Tessa rushed to his side, fumbling with the mechanism. "It's okay," she murmured, her fingers working frantically. "I've got you." Logan's growls and the clash of bodies echoed around her, but she forced herself to focus. Finally, the trap released, and the young wolf limped free. Logan reappeared moments later, his fur matted with blood. Some his, most not. His amber eyes glowed with a feral intensity, and for a moment, Tessa froze. "Let's go," he said, his voice rough as he shifted back to human form. As they returned to the main cabin, Tessa couldn't shake the image of Logan in battle. He had been powerful, forceful, a force of nature, but he had also been terrifying. Alone in her room that night, Tessa replayed the events in her mind. She couldn't decide which scared her more, the hunters or the man she was beginning to trust. Chapter 9. The pack's meeting room buzzed with tension. Maps and notes were scattered across the long wooden table, and the air was thick with frustration. "We can't just sit here and wait for them to come back," Kyle snapped, slamming his fist on the table. "The hunters are picking us off because we're too scared to act." Lydia, calm as ever, leaned back in her chair. "Acting recklessly will only make things worse. We need a strategy, not bravado." Tessa hovered near the edge of the room, feeling the weight of every skeptical glance sent her way. She tried to focus on the conversation, but her mind was still reeling from the night before. Logan's feral intensity had both awed and unnerved her, and the memory clung to her like a shadow. Logan entered the room, his presence commanding as always. "Enough," he said, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "We're not fighting blind. Danny, what did you find?" Danny, lounging against the wall, held up a folder. "Hunters aren't just tracking us, they're baiting us. They've set traps along the southern edge of the territory, hoping we'll stumble into them." A murmur of unease rippled through the room. "That's where the food run was planned," Lydia said, her brow furrowing. Logan nodded. "Which means we need to reroute and warn the others." "I can help," Tessa blurted before she could stop herself. All eyes turned to her, some curious, others hostile. "With what exactly?" Kyle sneered. Tessa swallowed hard. "If they're using bait, I can distract them. Hunters are watching my videos, right? I could lead them off track, buy you time to warn everyone." Logan's expression darkened. "Absolutely not." "Why not?" she challenged, her frustration bubbling over. "I'm already in this mess because of my videos. Let me use that to fix it." "Because it's dangerous," Logan said, his tone brooking no argument. "Everything about this is dangerous," she shot back. "But at least I'd be doing something useful instead of standing around like dead weight." Danny chuckled, breaking the tension. "She's got a point, bro." Logan glared at him. "Stay out of this." But Lydia's calm voice cut through the argument. "She's willing to help, Logan. Let her." The plan was simple. Well, simple enough to make Tessa's stomach churn. She would post a live update to her followers, carefully crafted to suggest she was miles away from the pack's territory. Meanwhile, Danny and a small group would use the distraction to safely reroute supplies and warn the others. Sitting cross-legged on the floor of the cabin, Tessa adjusted her phone's angle, her fingers trembling slightly. "You don't have to do this," Logan said from behind her, his voice low. She glanced over her shoulder. "Yes, I do." He didn't reply, but the storm in his eyes said enough. With a deep breath, she hit record. "Hey everyone," she began, forcing a bright smile. "Just a quick update. I'm out here in the city, soaking up some sun and good vibes. Stay tuned for my next video. It's going to be a wild one." She ended the stream quickly, exhaling in relief. "That should keep them busy for a while." Logan leaned against the wall, his arms crossed. "You make it look easy." "It's not," she admitted, meeting his gaze. "But it's worth it, right?" For a moment, something softened in his expression. "Yeah, it." Hours later, the pack returned from their mission unscathed. The plan had worked. "Not bad, rookie," Danny said, clapping Tessa on the shoulder. Kyle begrudgingly muttered, "It bought us time, I'll give you that." Lydia offered her a warm smile. "You did well." Tessa's chest swelled with a mix of relief and pride. For the first time since all this began, she felt like she had contributed, like she belonged. That night, Logan found her sitting outside, staring up at the stars. "You should be inside," he said, his voice softer than usual. Tessa shrugged. "I needed some air." He sat down beside her, the silence between them comfortable. "Thank you," Logan said finally. She glanced at him, surprised. For what? For stepping up, he said, his gaze steady. The pack starting to see it too. She felt her cheeks warm under his praise. Well, I had to do something. Can't let you have all the hero moments. His lips twitched into the faintest smile. Fair enough. For a moment, the weight of everything, the hunters, the danger, the uncertainty. The moment didn't last. Logan's phone buzzed, and his expression darkened as he read the message. What is it? Tessa asked, her stomach sinking. He handed her the phone, the screen displaying a single, chilling line. You're protecting her, but for how long? Logan's jaw tightened, his amber eyes blazing. They're coming for you, Tessa, and now they know exactly where to find you. Chapter 10. The forest was unnaturally quiet, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. Tessa trailed a few steps behind Logan, her boots crunching softly against the forest floor. She clutched a flashlight in one hand, but the faint beam barely pierced the darkness. Are you sure about this? She asked, her voice hushed. Logan glanced over his shoulder, his expression calm but focused. It's routine. Just a sweep to make sure the territory's clear. Routine, Tessa repeated, her tone skeptical. Because nothing about this feels routine. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Relax, I've done this 100 times. Yeah, well, I haven't, she muttered, scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. Logan's steps slowed, and he held up a hand, signaling for her to stop, his head tilted slightly, his sharp ears picking up something she couldn't hear. What is it? She whispered, her grip tightening on the flashlight. Stay here, he said, his voice low and commanding. Logan. Stay, he repeated, his amber eyes flashing as he moved silently into the trees. Tessa's heart pounded as she waited, every creak and rustle around her amplified by her nerves. The seconds stretched into minutes, and her stomach twisted with anxiety. Then she heard it, a sharp crack like a branch snapping underfoot. Logan, she called softly, taking a hesitant step forward. A shadow moved in her periphery, and before she could react, a figure emerged from the darkness. Not Logan, the man sneered, raising a weapon that glinted ominously in the moonlight. Logan appeared out of nowhere, slamming into the man with a feral growl. The two tumbled to the ground, but the ambush had been well planned. More figures emerged from the shadows, surrounding them. Run! Logan barked, shifting mid-sentence into his wolf form. Tessa stumbled back, her flashlight falling to the ground. But instead of running, she grabbed a heavy branch from the ground and swung it with all her strength at the nearest attacker. The man grunted as the branch connected with his ribs, but Tessa's small victory was short-lived. Another hunter lunged toward her, grabbing her wrist. Gotcha, he growled. Before she could scream, Logan was there, his massive wolf form a blur of motion. He tore into the hunter, sending him sprawling, but the attack left Logan exposed. A sharp hiss filled the air as one of the hunters fired a dart that embedded itself in Logan's side. He howled in pain, stumbling but refusing to fall. Logan! Tessa screamed, panic surging through her. The fight was chaotic. Logan, even injured, was a force of nature, his snarls and strikes keeping the hunters at bay. But their weapons were unlike anything Tessa had ever seen. Electric nets, tranquilizer darts, and other cruel devices designed to neutralize their prey. One of the hunters, a wiry man with a cruel smile, stepped forward, his gun trained on Logan. You think you're so untouchable, don't you? The man taunted. But the world's about to see you for what you really are. Monsters. Logan growled, low in his throat, his body trembling with the effort to stay upright. The hunter glanced at Tessa, his smile widening. And thanks to her, we're closer than ever. Tessa's blood ran cold. What are you talking about? The man chuckled. You think your little videos didn't help us? Every click, every comment, breadcrumbs right to your door. Rage flared in Tessa's chest, but before she could respond, Logan lunged, taking the man down in a brutal strike. The remaining hunters hesitated, their leader's downfall momentarily throwing them off balance. "Let's go!" one of them shouted, and the group retreated, disappearing into the shadows as quickly as they had appeared. Tessa dropped to her knees beside Logan, who had shifted back to human form. Blood seeped from a gash on his side, and his breathing was labored. "Logan," she said, her voice trembling, "stay with me, please." "I'm fine," he rasped, though the pain in his voice betrayed him. "You're not fine," she snapped, tearing off her jacket and pressing it against the wound. "Stop being so stubborn for once." His lips twitched in a faint, humorless smile. "Bossy." Her laugh came out more like a sob. "Shut up and let me help you." Back at the pack's territory, Lydia worked quickly, cleaning and stitching Logan's wound while Danny hovered nearby. "You're an idiot," Danny said, though his tone lacked its usual playfulness. "Noted," Logan replied, wincing as Lydia tightened a bandage. Tessa sat in the corner, her hands still trembling. The hunter's words echoed in her mind, and a deep sense of guilt gnawed at her. "This is my fault," she said softly. Logan's head snapped toward her, his eyes blazing. "No, this is on them, not you." "But if I hadn't—" "Tessa," Logan interrupted, his voice firm despite his exhaustion. "They're after us no matter what. You didn't cause this." She met his gaze, the sincerity in his words grounding her, if only for a moment. Later that night, Danny dropped something into Tessa's lap. A photograph. She picked it up, her heart stopping as she recognized her own face. "They left it behind," Danny said grimly. Tessa stared at the photo, the words scrawled across the bottom, sending a chill down her spine. Her target. Tessa clenched the photograph, her resolve hardening. "They're not going to stop, are they?" Logan's amber eyes burned with determination. "No, but neither are we." Chapter 11. Tessa sat at the kitchen table in the pack's main cabin, staring at the photograph the hunters had left behind. Her face stared back at her, the word "target" scrawled across the bottom like a branding iron. "This is my fault," she murmured, her fingers tightening around the edges of the photo. "It's not," Danny said, leaning back in his chair with a casualness that didn't match the tension in his voice. "These guys don't need an excuse to come after us." Tessa's gaze snapped to him. "But I gave them one, didn't I? My stupid video? If I hadn't posted it—" "Enough!" Logan's voice cut through the room like a whip. Tessa looked up to find him standing in the doorway, his amber eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. "They've been after us long before you came into the picture. Stop blaming yourself." "But they're closing in because of me," she argued, standing abruptly. "If I hadn't been so careless—" Logan strode over, his presence commanding as always. "You didn't put us on their radar. They would have found us eventually. All you did was speed up the timeline. That's supposed to make me feel better?" she snapped, the guilt and fear in her chest bubbling over. Logan's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Lydia entered the room, carrying a stack of maps and a grim expression. "We've got a bigger problem," she said, dropping the maps on the table. The group gathered around as Lydia spread the maps out, pointing to several marked locations. "These are the sites where hunters have been spotted," she explained. "At first the movement seemed random, but I've been tracking their patterns." Tessa leaned closer, her stomach sinking as Lydia drew a line connecting the dots. "They're circling us," Lydia said, her voice heavy with finality. "Closing in on the sanctuary." Silence filled the room, the weight of her words settling like a storm cloud. "How long do we have?" Logan asked, his voice low. "A week, maybe less," Lydia replied. "They're testing our defenses, waiting for the right moment to strike." Danny exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "Great. So now we're playing defense on top of everything else." Tessa's guilt flared again, but instead of retreating, she stepped forward. "What can I do to help?" Kyle, who had been lurking by the window, snorted. "Haven't you done enough?" "Kyle?" Logan growled, his tone a clear warning. Kyle raised his hands in mock surrender. "I'm just saying, maybe the person who led them here shouldn't be part of the solution." Tessa clenched her fists. But before she could respond, Danny spoke up. Kyle, shut up. She's been more useful than you in the last week. Kyle glared but didn't push further. Lydia, if you want to help, I need you and Danny to dig into the hunters' networks. Find out where their base of operations is, who's funding them, anything we can use to get ahead of them. Tessa nodded, grateful for the chance to contribute. We're on it. The hours passed in a blur of research. Tessa and Danny sat side by side, laptops open as they sifted through articles, public records, and encrypted forums. Check this out, Danny said, tilting his screen toward her. This guy claims he's seen werewolves in the area. Posted a picture of tracks that look suspiciously familiar. Tessa frowned. That's near the old mill, isn't it? Danny nodded. Which means they've got eyes on more than just the sanctuary. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she searched for connections. If we can figure out where they're operating from, we can warn the pack before it's too late. Danny leaned back, smirking. Not bad for a civilian. Tessa shot him a look. Thanks, I think. Meanwhile, Logan paced the main cabin, the tension in his shoulders visible to anyone who cared to look. Lydia stood nearby, her watchful gaze fixed on him. You're blaming yourself, she said softly. Logan didn't stop pacing. Of course I am. I brought her into this. And you care about her, Lydia added, her tone pointed. Logan froze, his jaw tightening. That's not the issue, isn't it? Lydia pressed. Your feelings for her are clouding your judgment, Logan. You need to decide what's more important, her or the pack. His fists clenched at his sides, but he didn't answer. The breakthrough came just before dawn. Tessa sat up straight, her eyes wide as she read the report on her screen. Danny, look at this, she said, shoving the laptop toward him. The document detailed the hunters' strategies, bait, divide, conquer, and listed several known allies who had helped them gather intel. Danny's expression darkened as he read one particular name. You've got to be kidding me. What? Tessa asked, leaning closer. Danny pointed to the screen. That's Kyle's cousin. He left the pack years ago, and now he's working with the hunters? The implications hit them both at once. You don't think... Tessa began, her voice trailing off. Danny's jaw tightened. We need to tell Logan. Minutes later, Logan's growl echoed through the cabin as he stared at the screen. We have a traitor. Chapter 12. The tension in the air was so thick it felt like it could snap at any moment. Tessa stood at the edge of the pack's meeting room, her back pressed against the wall as Logan and Danny dragged Kyle's cousin Jake into the center of the cabin. Jake's hands were bound, his face bruised and his lip split. He glared at the group around him, defiant even in his current state. Talk. Jake snorted, blood staining his teeth as he smirked. Or what? You'll rough me up some more? Logan's wolf was close to the surface. Tessa could see it in the way his muscles tensed and his amber eyes glowed faintly. Danny stepped forward, his usual playful demeanor replaced with cold fury. Start talking, Jake. What's the plan? Jake leaned back against his chair, his smirk widening. You think I'm afraid of you? You don't know who you're up against. Logan's fist slammed into the table beside him, the sound reverberating through the room. What are the hunters planning? Jake flinched, but his defiance didn't waver. A reckoning. You wolves have been hiding in the shadows for too long. Once the world sees what you really are, they'll finish what the hunters started. Tessa's stomach turned as Jake's words sank in. They're going to expose you? Jake glanced at her, his eyes narrowing. Not just them, you too. You've been pretty helpful, you know. Your little videos gave us everything we needed. The guilt she'd been trying to suppress roared back with a vengeance. Where's the assault coming from? Logan pressed, his voice sharper now. Jake chuckled darkly. Why should I tell you? You're all dead anyway. Danny reached for him, but Logan held up a hand to stop him. He crouched in front of Jake, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. You think the hunters will protect you when this blows up? Tell me what I want to know, and I might let you walk out of here alive. For the first time, fear flickered in Jake's eyes. An hour later, the group stood around the table. The information Jake had reluctantly provided spread out before them. "They're planning to hit us in 2 days," Lydia said, her calm exterior masking the weight of the revelation. "They've mapped out the sanctuary and identified our weak points. And they're not coming alone," Danny added. "Jake said they've called in reinforcements. We're outnumbered." Tessa hovered near the doorway, feeling more like an outsider than ever. She wanted to help, to prove herself, but the knot in her stomach reminded her that she was part of the problem. Logan's phone buzzed, and he glanced at the screen. His expression darkened as he read the message. "What is it?" Lydia asked. Wordlessly, Logan handed the phone to Tessa. Her heart stopped as she read the message. "Turn yourself in, or the pack dies. You have 24 hours. Her hands trembled as she handed the phone back. "They want me." "No," Logan said immediately, his voice firm. "You're not going anywhere." "But if I don't, we'll handle it," Logan interrupted. "You're not turning yourself over to them." Tessa's frustration boiled over. "This is about me, Logan. They're only doing this because of me. I have to fix it." Logan stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "You think sacrificing yourself will fix anything? They'll kill you, Tessa, and then they'll come for us anyway." Their argument escalated, voices rising as the rest of the pack watched in tense silence. "You're always telling me to stay out of it, to let you handle it," Tessa said, her voice shaking. "But I'm already in it, Logan, and I'm not running away." Logan's jaw tightened, his conflict written all over his face. "You don't understand the risks." "Then help me understand." The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Later, as Logan brooded in the corner, Lydia and Danny approached him. "She's right, you know," Lydia said gently. Danny nodded. "She's proven herself, Logan. You might not like it, but she's part of this now." Logan ran a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. "If something happens to her, it's her choice," Lydia interrupted, her tone firm. "Just like it's yours to let her stand with us." Tessa sat on the cabin steps, staring out into the forest as the stars began to appear. She heard Logan's footsteps before he spoke. "You're not going to back down, are you?" he asked, his voice softer than before. She shook her head. "No, I can't." He sat beside her, the tension between them less charged but no less present. "I'll protect you," he said quietly. She turned to him, her eyes searching his. "What? If I want to protect you too?" For a moment, the mask he always wore slipped, and she saw the man beneath, the one who carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. Tessa stood, her resolve solidifying as she looked out into the dark forest. "I'm going to confront them, Logan. One way or another, this ends with me."